Good morning, everyone. Today's my last day to make my single jokes. So I'm gonna start by saying I didn't get nobody to make breakfast for me this morning, but hopefully tomorrow, not tomorrow, the day after, I will have to get up and make breakfast for somebody else. But I'm fortunate for the opportunity, grateful for the opportunity to come before you this morning and share from God's Word. If you turn with me to the book of Galatians, Galatians chapter number 4. Galatians chapter number 4. Continuing from verse number 21. Reading from the New American Standard Bible, it says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a bondwoman and one by a free woman. But the son by the bond woman was born according to the flesh, and the son of the free woman through the promise. This is allegorically speaking of these two women, two covenants, one proceeding from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are to be slaves. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. Verse 26, but the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, barren woman, who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more numerous are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband. And you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at the time, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit. So it is now also. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of a bondwoman, but of the free woman. Trevor gave me a very difficult task this morning. But he make it simple. I'll just stick to what the Bible says. All right? First, to better understand what Paul is seeking to explain in Galatians chapter number 4, we have to cast our minds back to Genesis chapter 15 and chapter 16. In chapter 15, God comes again and he speaks to Abraham and he promises him a son. And Sarah isn't as enthused by the idea. She is looking at herself and her state, and she's saying to herself that I can't bear no child in this state. So in chapter number 16, we see where Sarah takes what some might call initiative and goes forth and she takes her handmaid, her bondservant, Hagar, and presents Hagar to her husband and say, look, I a little old, she a little young, do the thing with she that I can't do. So Abraham, being a dutiful husband, he listens to his wife, and then he gets in trouble, right? Because now she's upset with him because he listened to her. She's upset now that Hagar is with child and she's going to bear a son called Ishmael, and she's persecuting Hagar and her son at this time, because later on when Isaac comes, that same son Ishmael is going to tease the son of promise. See, brethren and friends, God made a promise to Abraham. And when God makes a promise, it isn't incumbent upon what we can do, but all based upon what he has said. You see, sometimes we think the best way to fulfill the promise that God gave is to put things into our own hands. So Sarah says to herself, I don't see within me the capacity to do the thing that God says he's going to do, which is true because he never said you're going to do it. He said he's going to do it. And she says to herself that in my old age, I can't bear this child. But it seems like this girl have the facilities. So instead of waiting on God and doing things according to how he has designed, sometimes we go ahead of ourselves and we put things in front of what God has promised for us. At this point in the book of Galatians, Paul has been pleading with them, and he's been, he's trying his best to speak to their Jewish sensibility. So he starts and he talks about, Abraham and how they are children of Abraham, because the Jews, guess what? They love to be children of Abraham. They love that. They stand on that. That's prominent to them. Then he goes and he talks about the law, and he says, the law is a schoolmaster, and it's gonna bring you to a point of maturity where you are able to go and do the thing that you're supposed to do. But he comes back again at this time and he says, you know what? Let me talk about this promised son. They understand that promised son, because guess what? They look back at Isaac and say, that's the promise right there. That's where Israel comes from. Because we know from Isaac comes Jacob, and from Jacob comes the 12 tribes, and they have a lot of fealty to their heritage. They love the heritage. So when the Gentiles come now and they don't have to adhere to the heritage, they're a little upset that you're not adhering to my heritage. How can you be a promised son if you didn't go through the things that I went through? So for you to have the promise that I have, guess what? I want you to go back and deal with things that God had me deal with. But you see, the thing what happened to the Judaizers at this point in time, they had so much fealty to the law that they didn't even understand the purpose of the law. What they didn't understand is that God didn't give the law to put them under bondage. The law came because of the grace that God had given to them. You see, because God had redeemed them out of Egypt and now made them a nation, he gave them the law so that by the grace that God gave them, he established the relationship and the gratitude they should have towards God, they would have obedience to him. But somewhere along the line, the law took more prominence than the lawgiver. Somewhere along the line, the traditions of the day took more prominence than the lawgiver. So even when Jesus comes on the Sabbath and he heals a man, they say to him, don't do that, today is the wrong day for that, because they look at the miraculous working of Jesus as a common work. They're looking at Jesus healing the sick as plaster in a wall, and they don't understand that they're standing in the presence of God in man's flesh. So they miss the Messiah, and now they come to the church that the Messiah has established, and they're saying that y'all can't be calling on the same God that I've been calling on. That's a little unfair. Let me just hold this here quick. What happens sometimes is that when you had to go through certain things, and you see somebody else don't have to go through the things that you went through, it is kind of dig at you a little bit. I could talk to her for a minute. I have a little sister, right? Her name is Aliyah. And there were certain laws that me and my brother were under. That when she came, it was a new covenant. It's a new covenant under grace. So I know that when I miss my spelling test and it don't come out too good, the rod of correction is waiting for me. So I knew, now picture this, I've gone through this law, I've been given this correction over and over because I still can't spell to this day. And I pick up my sister from school and the teacher hands me the book and I open it and I see that the results aren't favorable. So the anticipation in my mind is that when I go home, guess what? She's going to face what I had to face. She's not going to face the circumcision, but she's going to face the rod. I'm expecting that. But little did I know, the covenant changed in 1999. I didn't know that. I didn't realize the child of promise came. I didn't realize that. I didn't get that notification. So I'm coming home with her, and I'm saying to myself, for all the things that she's done to me, the licks is coming. And I'm anticipating, I'm saying, my father bought a new belt last week. I'm thinking about all these things, and I'm saying, she's going to get it. So I'm sitting in the house, and I tell my brother, and he excited, because he know what we went through. So we're sitting in the house, and we're waiting, and our parents got home. And they know how the spelling test, so they want to know how she do, right? Well, I'm ready to tell you. I'm ready to let you know that the result's not favorable. And I know when the result's not favorable, there's consequences that come with that, no, sir? So I tell them, they look at the book, and they go out into the gallery. Now, when I go out into the gallery, I know what I'm facing. I know that there's thunder and lightning out there. So I'm standing by the door, and I'm waiting to hear the thunder roll and the lightning strike. And I hear tears coming, and I hear crying, but I'm not hearing licks. And then I peep through the window, and I see them consoling her and telling her that, if you need help, come and talk to us. If you get in trouble in school, come and check us. And now I'm indignant inside, because I've gone through some tribulations. I've gone through some sacrifices. I've burned some calves. I've had some circumcision, and she's coming here and facing promise and grace, and it's just not fair. And I'm inside, and I'm watching my brother, and we're upset. Now, mind you, she's about 6, we're about 12 and 14, but we're upset because we know what we went through. Only for them to tell us, we're trying to do things a little different. Why didn't they do different with me? But the Jews find themselves in a similar position because they dealt with a God based on the teaching that they had that needed burnt offerings and sacrifices and holy days and Sabbaths and circumcision and all these ceremonial things and all these legalistic things that they were taught. Not that God presented it so, but that's how they were taught. That it had to be in accordance to the law just like this. So now when the child of promise comes, the child of bondage is looking at that child of promise with indignation. The Jews are looking down at this new generation of God's people and saying that you didn't go through what I went through. You don't deserve to have the relationship that we have. Not realizing that their mindset is keeping them away from the relationship that God truly wants to have with them. The legalism that they find themselves in, the fact that they want to impose Moses' law on men who don't even know who Moses is, and they don't understand that. Sometimes we find ourselves in that situation in the church. Generations have passed, and things are different. And I hear stories about how things were in the 70s. But I wasn't even a thought in the 70s, so I can't tell you what it was like. I can't tell you what it looked like. I've seen pictures of brothers. I don't know them. I never speak to them. I don't know what it was like back then. But when we reach our place of promise, and a place of grace, and a place of going forward, we can't try to bind things that used to work on times that are now. You see, what we find ourselves in sometimes, we could look just like these Jews, and we are indignant against a generation that seems to have it a little easier sometimes. Because that's not the promise that we had, and we find it a little hard sometimes because guess what? As we get older, we learn a little better. As the church exists, we get it a little better over the time. And sometimes we realize that there were certain things that we were beholden to that may have been hurting people, and we have to let go of those things. You know, sometimes we had to put down the belt and embrace the hugs. I mean, they never put on the belt with me, but, you know. But we find ourselves in situations like that because if it wasn't so for me, it can't be so for he. If it wasn't so for me, why they having these benefits? And we find ourselves like Hagar. What I find so interesting is that Paul would take Hagar and Ishmael and use them to represent the law, knowing fully well that it was through the lineage of Isaac that the law came. But he does that to show them, who do you really want to be? Do you want to be a bond servant, or do you want to be free? You see, the Jews didn't like that idea of slavery too much. They had a lot of history with slavery. They don't like it. So I remember Jesus speaking to them. He says, you know, I come to speak the truth to set you free. And they say, we have never been slaves. And I look at my Bible and I flip back to Exodus and I say, but that's 430 years of slavery right here. It has 70 years in Assyrian and Babylonian captivity that they just seem to forget. And at that point in time, they're under Roman occupation. But the idea of being slaves is something that is so against their nature because of the history that they have with it. What we tend to find in the church today is that when we have a history outside of feeling disenfranchised, feeling victimized, feeling oppressed, when I come into the church and I start to feel like that, I start to have difficulties relating. If in my daily life I feel persecuted, when I come into the church and I start to feel that persecution, I start to have difficulties. It start to rub me the wrong way. And then we find ourselves in challenges of opinion when God wants us to agree on doctrine. So he tells them that we can't be children of the bondwoman, because he understands that Isaac was a child that God envisioned, that God had plans for, that God promised. And he didn't just promise Abraham, he promised Eve, he promised everybody coming all the way down. And Isaac wasn't even the full promise. Jesus was the full promise. So he wants us to know that when the child of promise comes, there's no room for the child of bondage. There's no room for the shackled child. There's no room for the child of oppression. There's no room for the child of persecution. There's no room for the child that reminds us of what wasn't to be. You see, Isaac was a child of promise, but Ishmael was a child of compromise. And to this day, we're still dealing with the effects of that compromise. We have a holiday on tomorrow and Tuesday because of the effects of that compromise. And I know people are happy for the holiday because the amount of traffic I see on the main road in Aripara, I never see so much traffic before in my life. Maxie's heading down to the beach, everybody excited for the day off. But we still deal with the ramifications of that child of compromise. When we look at the Middle East, we see ramifications of that child of compromise. If we go back to 1991, we see ramifications of that child of compromise right here. In 1990, sorry, I wasn't wrong. But 1990, we see ramifications of that child of compromise right here in Trinidad and Tobago. But we have to be careful that we don't end up as children of compromise trying to serve God. You see, when God gives us his law, It is not because he wants us to be bound and gagged and limited, but he wants us to understand that our gratitude towards him for our salvation will be manifested in our obedience to his will. The Judaizers, in their minds, relationship with God is not the first thing. In their minds, law adherence too, that's the first thing you have to do. And if we put the law over the lawgiver, we find ourselves in a situation where the purpose is muddled. Where we find ourselves trying to merit our way into heaven as opposed to love God and serve him because we love him. All of us have friends and family and cohorts and stuff like that. And we all like it when they do things for us out of the love of their hearts. But sometimes when, they do something for you because they feel forced to, it don't feel as good. The only person I know who like to do things, we get forced to do things is my father. He like to force you to change the channel and to take out the garbage and to clean the fish and all these kind of, that's the only person I know that do them kind of things. But everybody else, they seem to appreciate it when you take the initiative. When you have examined the relationship and you feel that purpose within you that I have to do this because I love you so much. Not that I love you, not I have to do this because you tell me to do this. God didn't want us to be here on a Sunday morning and just give him automated worship. He didn't want that. He didn't want us to spend every day just wondering, what's the least I could give him? He didn't want that. He didn't want us to look at the scriptures as a minimal list that we have to fulfill. He didn't want that. He wanted us to love him so much that it just can't help but be seen by everybody else. He wanted us to love him so much that when that worship go up, it is a sweet smelling savor. Here's the funny thing. Sometimes you can know who cooking by what you smell. Right? I had some roommates when I was in university. And they know on a Saturday, I'm cooking food for the whole week. Because when time's hard, choice, it. So I remember one week I made 5 dishes. It was macaroni pie, baked chicken, fried rice, peas, and I think I had a little salad. And by the time Friday reached, all I had was macaroni pie and chicken sauce. But that's what we had to get to rally the week with that. And I always remember there was a day I was cooking, and a fella I never spoke to before just show up. He just show up in the kitchen. He just pop in. And he say, boy, I know you was in here. I said, how? I said, I smell it. He said, them fellas don't cook like you don't smell the same way. And I wonder if God, on a first day of the week, he say, boy, I know all in the kitchen. Because I smell it. Sometimes he might smell it and say, well, I ain't want that. But do we give him the best? Do we present to him what he deserves? Not because we're scared of him, but because we love him so much. You see, the motive changes the way how we do things. These Judaizers, all they wanted was to get the Gentiles on the same level that they think that they are. But they didn't even want them to be on their level. They wanted them to be behind. Because they're saying to themselves that only we deserve Christianity. You all have to go back to Judaism and work your way back up to Christianity. And that's not what God wanted. God wanted them to appreciate that even though they were with him before in Judaism, now they have a better covenant made with better promises and better law, and they should be excited to share that with somebody else. But when we present the law, when we present the new covenant as do's and don'ts, it puts people in a very peculiar situation. When we present it as legislation and not relationship, it's a different situation. It's hard for me to give you the good news if the good news is punishment. That's not good news. That's not good. It's hard for me to give you the good news if the good news is persecution. It's hard for me to give you the good news if when you look at the life that you live right now, you're going to feel judged by those who have the good news. That's a difficult place to find yourself in. But if I'm a child of promise, I understand grace. I understand love. I understand mercy. And I can't help but want to give somebody that grace. And I can't help but want to give somebody that mercy. I can't help but want to share that with somebody else. And I don't want to bind them to things that don't even work. What was circumcision? It was a sign that this man came from a tribe of Israel. And that's all it did. It didn't make you religiously holy. It didn't make it anything better in the sight of God. You can't say, well, God, my circumcision was 9 o'clock on the 8th day. No, this one was on 10 o'clock, so mine's better. It did nothing for you. It was just an outward sign with what should have been an inward relationship. But sometimes we have the outward signs, but the inward relationship not working right. So we have the nice clothes, and we show up on time, and our hair is cut, and we do all these kind of things. So outside we look good, but inside the relationship not there. Because my concern is not so much to give God his best, but to reach home before the 12 o'clock kickoff. We have to think about these things. We have to consider these things. Am I serving God because I understand what he has given to me? Or am I just trying to fill out a checklist? To present myself holy, not even to God, but to others. Because the Judaizers wanted the Gentiles to present themselves holy to them, not to God. They wanted to be the judge, jury, and executioner. They wanted to be the final stamp on whether or not they had a relationship with God, and that's not our place. We don't have the authority to tell someone that they're not deserving of a relationship with God. That's not our place to be. We can't find ourselves there. What we can do is show them what that relationship could do for you. So Paul tells us in Timothy, he says, I am the chiefest of sinners. You know what he's trying to say there? He said, whatever sin you feel you have, if he could cover mine, he could cover yours. Right in Galatians, he lets us know that Jew, Greek, don't matter. Born free, don't matter. Male, female, it don't matter. Because the promise is for you too. Joint heirs with Christ, same reward. But we have to be careful that we don't take the things that we think are necessary and bind it on somebody else. I used to go to that school on the promenade. The name escaping me right now. Oh, San Fernando Boys RC, right. And at this time of the year, you know they call this? Lent. And if you show up with chicken in your box, they're watching you funny. Because you're supposed to be fasting right now. Little do they know, I eat fast every day. Every single day. But if you show up with some chicken or some beef, God forbid they bring the pork, they're watching you funny. Because you're supposed to be only eating fish and soya right now because it's Lent. You're supposed to be fasting. And even if you don't find yourself subscribing to the faith, they pressure you into doing those things. And I always found it interesting that they put so much emphasis on 40 days of eating fish. Like that could take you into heaven. You think I could go to God and say, God, my physical diet, top notch. Lord, my carbs, my macros, my calorie intake, off the chain. Where's my spot? that don't do nothing for you. If your spiritual diet is not where it's supposed to be, you're going to find yourself deficient in a lot of places. But here's the funny thing about your spiritual diet. If you don't eat breakfast, you kind of feel hungry, right? If you don't consume God's word, here what the devil does. He puts something else inside there so you don't miss it. And he might say, well, yeah, he could bring sin. Not all the time. He could bring a tradition. He could bring a law that you make up for yourself and put that inside there and make you feel full with that. Make you feel full with legislation and regulation and laws and paperwork and all these kind of things when God wants you to have relationship. You see, if the Jews had a proper relationship with the Gentiles, they wouldn't be concerned with segregation, they would be concerned with integration. They would be concerned with how can we not just combine our skills here, but bring more people inside. But they were so concerned with being the religious elite. God has called us to be religious, but he never asked us to be elite. He never asked us to be so separate from the world that we feel we hide on everybody else. I know in Isaiah and Micah, he said that, he put us on a hill, he put us on the new Mount Sinai and all this. I know it sounds good, we high up, but he put us high up so we could work low down. That's what he brought us there for. Jesus was higher than we could ever be, and guess what? He will be lower than we ever was. John chapter 13, guess what he do? He washed them fellas' feet. I don't know about you, but if somebody actively plotting against your downfall, it will be hard to serve them with love and kindness, right? But that's what Jesus did. So he tells us to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And we said, that one easy, because I like my neighbor. But then he says to love your enemies as well. That one a little tough. And I wonder if he said that because sometimes we are our own worst enemy, and we have to love ourselves a little bit too. Sometimes the person that persecutes you the most is you. Sometimes the person that brings you down the most is you. And you had to give you some love too. You had to give you some grace as well. You have to be willing to forgive you, because guess what? God is more than willing to do so. So chapter 5, verse 1, he says, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. I know Trevor want to do that next week, but let me get a little sneak peek here. Jesus didn't die to bind us up. Jesus didn't die to oppress us. Jesus didn't die to put a heavy burden on the back of our necks. Jesus died to set us free. And if he could remove the yoke of sin and slavery, who am I to put something back on your neck? Who am I to put that weight upon you? Hebrews tells us in chapter 12, he said we have to let go of the sin and the weight that so easily beset us. And sometimes we have the sin, I ain't say covered, because I don't think there's no point in life you can say you have sin under control, but we kind of understand how the sin does come. We know what the temptations are, we know what the things that we're supposed to stay from, even though we just indulge in it, but that's sermon for next day. But that weight could be so many different things. Expectations could weigh us down so much. I love my grandmother to death. But I remember there was a day I went by her and I had on some short pants. And she told me, a preacher man can't be wearing short pants. Because that's the expectation. It wasn't even a Sunday. I just went to buy some groceries, But she watched me and said, a preacher man can't be wearing short pants. Because that's the expectation. And it's little things like that sometimes that add up over the years. And it trips us up because we can't meet the expectations of others. But God only expected us to be children, that's it. I know why he used, Paul would use little children over and over in the same Galatians. John, when he's writing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, he would use that phrase, little children, over and over. He says that because they understand that children have the capacity to make mistakes. But also, they have the capacity to learn. They have the capacity to learn. Sorry, I use capacity and propensity and I put it together. But we have the capacity to learn. And he wants us to be in a state of mind that no matter how long you find yourself in the church, that you're always ready to learn. That you're always ready to build on what is given so that you could stop making the same mistakes and you could grow forward. So you could go forward. So Paul doesn't come and say, all they're big and all they're hard back and all they should know better. He doesn't say that. He says, I didn't expect all to go back to these things. I didn't expect it to go back to Judaism. I didn't expect it to go back to idolatry. I didn't expect it to go back into the things of the world. But let me talk about this and let's reason a little bit and try to figure out why it is you want to go back to something that had you under slavery when freedom is available. We go to prison every week. And I know them fellas, they enjoy the classes. They have a lot of questions. They want to learn more. But if I come there and offer them freedom, they're taking it with both hands. They're grabbing it with both hands and they're ready to run out the door. Because freedom represents opportunity. It represents the opportunity to do something different. It represents the opportunity to not be bound by the consequences of my past actions. So when we come to the church, we're supposed to offer freedom. So that who you were before doesn't dictate who you could be for God. The things that you stumbled with before shouldn't dictate how far you could go for God today. That's the freedom that Jesus is offering for us. And that's the freedom we should never let go of. See, oftentimes, we let go of our own freedom and bind ourselves with things that God didn't need for us to bind ourselves with. And I watch any time, and I feel like I'll leave that for Bible class later. But I want us to understand that that child, that bond-servant child, that compromised child, is not something to be looked up to. It's not something to adore. It's not something to strive to be like. We should strive to be the child of promise. That promise started in the garden and is still active today. That promise is still available today. And even if you feel like I've gone too far, I do too much, that promise is available to me. I could bet my bottom dollar, and I don't have much dollars, but I could bet my bottom dollar that promise is still available to you today. As long as you have the breath of life, guess what? That promise is available to you. As long as you have life in this body, as long as God is giving you opportunity to see and to think, guess what? You have that opportunity available to you today. So I want to encourage you. We'll talk a little more later, but we're going to end here for now. But I want us to understand, let's not go back to bondage. It had no promise for us there. Let's not go back to Egypt. Let's not go back to Jerusalem. Let's go forward to where God is taking the church to be. So I invite you now, we're going to have a song of encouragement. And if you need the prayers of the church, today is a good day to come forward and for us to pray with you and pray for you. So come, stand as we sing.